The Intergalactic Combat Academy stood like a gleaming spire against the dusty horizon of Trinivir's moon. Constructed of polished metallic alloys and reinforced glass, the Academy was renowned across 17 star systems as the premier training facility for the galaxy's most promising warriors. The curved architecture of the main building rose 700 meters into the thin atmosphere, its training field sprawling across the lunar surface, illuminated by the glow of 3 distant suns. Inside the echo chamber of the central hall, 200 cadets from 37 species stood at attention. Among them, almost lost in the sea of imposing figures, stood Kayla Wynn. At 165 centimeters tall, the human was dwarfed by the Calarian cadets to her left, whose exoskeletons added nearly a meter to their already impressive height. To her right, a Mavorian warrior's translucent skin pulsed with bioluminescent threat displays, casting a pale blue glow over Kayla's unadorned uniform. Unlike her peers, Kayla carried no visible technological enhancements. Her wrists bore no tactical computers. Her eyes lacked the telltale flicker of retinal displays. Her uniform contained no power assist nodes. In a hall filled with the hum of personal shield generators and the soft clicking of neural implants, Kayla stood in near silence, her breathing barely audible even to the sensitive auditory receptors of the Viridian monitors. Sergeant Zoran, a veteran of the Proxima Centauri conflicts and decorated hero of the Ninth Fleet, paced before the assembled cadets. His forearms, each bearing the distinctive scarring of plasma fire, moved in perfect synchronization as he gestured toward the holographic display behind him. The Intergalactic Combat Academy exists for one purpose, he announced, his gravelly voice resonating through the hall without technological amplification. To transform raw potential into lethal efficiency, you have been selected as the finest warriors your respective worlds have to offer. But here, that means nothing. His gaze swept across the assembly, lingering momentarily on Kayla. A flicker of what might have been disappointment crossed his features before he continued. Humanity, he said, the word itself somehow becoming a challenge, has insisted on maintaining their representation in our program despite their obvious limitations. A ripple of amusement passed through the ranks. A Thorexian cadet named Varix, whose reinforced skeletal structure allowed him to support 3 times the mass of an unenhanced humanoid, made a sound that might have been a laugh. Cadet Wynn, Zoran said, stopping directly before Kayla. Your file indicates no combat enhancements, no neural upgrades, and no specialized training beyond standard Earth military procedures. What precisely do you bring to this academy? Kayla's eyes remained fixed forward, her posture perfect. When she spoke, her voice was quiet but clear. Discipline, sir. Varix's rumbling laughter grew louder. Discipline will not stop a Carvon Strider from tearing you apart. Human. Zoran did not reprimand the interruption. Instead, he tilted his head, studying Kayla as though she were a particularly puzzling tactical problem. Very well, Cadet Wynn. We shall see what human discipline accomplishes against the challenges that await. As the orientation continued, Kayla remained silent, absorbing information with careful attention while around her. The other cadets exchanged glances and subvocal communications. The prevailing sentiment was clear. The human would not last the first week. The training regime at the academy was brutal by design. Each morning began before the rising of Trinivir's 3rd sun with a 20-kilometer run across the lunar surface. The reduced gravity made the distance easier, but created its own challenges as cadets learned to control their movements in the alien environment. For most species, technological assistance compensated for the gravitational differences. Kayla, however, relied solely on adaptation and practice. During combat drills, the disparity became even more apparent. Varix, with his reinforced skeleton and synthetic muscle overlays, could generate enough force to punch through reinforced hull plating. The Calarians, with their natural armor and redundant nervous systems, could withstand damage that would be fatal to most other species. Even the more physically unimposing cadets, like the crystalline Civalians, possessed natural defenses beyond anything in human biology. In the firing range, the gap narrowed slightly. While Kayla lacked the integrated targeting systems of many of her peers, her marksmanship was precise and consistent. She scored in the upper percentile during stationary target practice, though her ranking fell during the more dynamic combat simulations where enhanced reflexes gave other cadets a significant advantage. "Observe the human," Varick said to a group of fellow cadets as they watched Kayla disassemble and reassemble a standard plasma rifle. "She relies on primitive manual dexterity, while the rest of us have progressed beyond such limitations." Kayla continued her work without acknowledgement, her fingers moving with practiced efficiency. The timer beside her workstation counted down. 12 seconds, 11, 10. Lizarin, a slender Medusan observer whose role was to record and analyze cadet performance, made a soft clicking sound with her mandibles. "Her time is improving, statistically significant progression over 3 standard cycles." "Statistical anomalies do not win wars," replied Varix dismissively. "Humans are diplomatic assets at best, not warriors." Kayla completed the reassembly in 8.4 seconds. Not the fastest time among the cadets, but respectable, even by enhanced standards. She placed the weapon back on the rack and moved to the next station without comment or celebration. As weeks passed, Kayla maintained her silent persistence. She was first to arrive at training and last to leave. During meal periods, while other cadets socialized and formed alliances, she ate quickly and returned to the practice facilities. Security footage would later reveal that she spent her personal hours in the physical training areas, repeating movements with an almost mechanical precision. Rumors began to circulate. A maintenance technician claimed to have seen her catch a falling surveillance drone with one hand when it malfunctioned above the dormitory corridor. A kitchen worker reported witnessing her lift a storage container that normally required mechanized assistance. But these stories were dismissed as exaggerations. Humans were known to be physically inferior to most spacefaring species. That was simply biological fact. Lizarin's data, however, told a different story. The observers' reports showed that Kayla's performance metrics were improving at a rate that exceeded projected models. Her strength indicators had doubled. Her reaction time had decreased by 30%. Her endurance scores were approaching those of cadets with cardiopulmonary enhancements. When Sergeant Zoran reviewed these findings, his expression remained impassive. But he began to observe the human cadet more closely during training exercises. He noticed how she studied the movements of other species, how she adapted techniques designed for different physiologies to work with human limitations. Most intriguingly, he noticed how she never engaged in the competitive displays so common among the other cadets. She neither boasted of her accomplishments nor responded to provocations. 3 months into the training cycle, Zoran announced the survival test. The cadets would be transported to Zerith 9, a small moon orbiting a gas giant in a neighboring system. There, they would be required to navigate hostile terrain, avoid indigenous predators, and reach an extraction point within a 50-hour window. "You will be organized into teams of 4, Zoran explained, with the exception of Cadet Wynn, who will proceed alone. A murmur of surprise passed through the assembly. Solo navigation of Zerith 9 was considered an advanced challenge, typically reserved for final year assessments. "Sir," Kayla said, breaking her customary silence, "I accept the assignment." Varix laughed openly. "The human accepts her death sentence. How admirable." Zoran silenced him with a glance. "Prepare your equipment. Departure is in 6 hours." In the preparation bay, cadets selected from an array of survival gear, environmental suits, weapons, medical supplies, communication devices, and nutrient packs. Most loaded themselves with as much technology as they could carry. Varix's team chose heavy armor and offensive weaponry, planning to eliminate any threats they encountered. A team of civilians opted for stealth technology and sensor arrays to avoid confrontation entirely. Kayla selected a standard environmental suit, a single combat knife, a compact medical kit, a basic water purifier, and a length of synthetic cord. As she packed these minimal supplies, Varix approached. "Your primitive brain has failed to grasp the dangers of Zerith 9 human," he said, towering over her. "The atmospheric toxins alone will overcome your respiratory system without proper filtration." Kayla secured her pack before responding. The standard issue suit filters are adequate for the toxin levels in the lowland regions. I will avoid the gas pockets in the northern hemisphere. And the Thornic herds, will you avoid those as well? When possible. Varix's facial plates shifted in what passed for amusement among his species. When they tear you apart, I will remember your confidence. The transport vessels departed on schedule, carrying the cadets to Zereth 9's rugged surface. As the ships descended through the moon's turbulent atmosphere, visibility dropped to near zero. The acidic clouds scraped against the hulls, leaving corrosive trails across the viewports. Kayla was deposited at her designated landing zone, a rocky outcropping surrounded by dense, alien vegetation. The plants here were mostly shades of deep purple and black, having evolved under the weak light of the distant sun. They rustled ominously as she secured her environment suit and checked her coordinates. The extraction point was 37 kilometers northeast, across a landscape of jagged rock formations, toxic swamps, and open plains known to be hunting grounds for some of the moon's most dangerous predators. The atmospheric conditions would make visibility poor, and the magnetic interference would render most communication devices unreliable at best. Kayla took a moment to survey her surroundings, mentally mapping the terrain against the briefing materials she had studied. Then, with methodical precision, she began to move. For the first 12 hours, her progress was steady. She navigated the initial rock formations by finding natural paths rather than attempting to scale the sheer faces. When confronted with a toxic bog that stretched for kilometers in either direction, she constructed a simple flotation device from the buoyant vegetation and used her cord to pull herself across. Meanwhile, the other teams were encountering their own challenges. Varix's heavily armed group had attracted the attention of a Thornic herd by firing their weapons at a smaller predator. The massive beasts, known for their territorial aggression, had forced them to take shelter in a narrow canyon where they now found themselves trapped. Lyzarin's team, which included the observant Medusan and 3 other cadets specialized in technical support rather than combat, had lost their direction when a magnetic storm disabled their navigation equipment. They had wandered into an area known to be frequented by Carvon striders, ambush predators that used camouflage and patience to hunt prey much larger than themselves. It was as Kayla was making her way across an exposed plateau that she heard the first distress call. Though intermittent and fragmented by interference, she recognized Lyzarin's distinctive vocal pattern. The message contained coordinates approximately 3 kilometers south of Kayla's position. Without hesitation, she altered her course. The detour would cost her valuable time and increase her risk of exposure, but the decision was made instantly. 17 minutes later, she crested a ridge and found Lyzarin's team huddled behind a rock formation, one member clearly injured. Cadet win. Lyzarin's mandibles clicked in surprise. Our distress call was directed to command. We did not expect rescue from another cadet. I was nearby, Kayla replied simply. She knelt beside the injured cadet, a Keelan whose exoskeleton had been cracked along its primary seam. What happened? Carvon Strider, the wounded Keelan rasped. It took Nevelyn first. We escaped, but I was caught by its secondary attack. Kayla nodded, examining the wound with careful fingers. The exoskeleton is damaged, but your internal membrane appears intact. I can stabilize this. From her small medical kit, she produced a sealant compound and began to apply it to the fracture. Our communications are down, Lyzarin explained. Navigation failed during the magnetic storm. We were attempting to reach higher ground to re-establish contact when the Strider attacked. As Kayla worked on the injured cadet, a low rumbling sound vibrated through the ground beneath them. She paused, her hands perfectly still as she listened. Something's coming, she said quietly. Multiple somethings, heavy. Lyzarin's sensory antennae quivered. Thornics, a small herd based on the vibration pattern, they must have been drawn by our distress signal. Can you move? Kayla asked the injured Keelan. Slowly, came the pained response. Kayla quickly finished applying the sealant. There's a cave system approximately 800 meters northeast. We need to reach it before the herd arrives. With efficiency born of countless training hours, she helped the injured cadet to his feet. The group began to move toward the caves, but their progress was painfully slow. The Keelan's injury forced them to stop frequently, and the sound of the approaching Thornix grew steadily louder. "We will not reach the caves in time," Lizarin stated, her voice clinically detached despite the dire circumstances. Kayla scanned the terrain, calculating distances and angles with rapid precision. "Continue toward the caves," she instructed. "I'll divert the herd." Before anyone could object, she had separated from the group, moving perpendicular to their path. She selected a position atop a rocky outcropping that offered visibility of both the approaching herd and the retreating cadets. The Thornix appeared moments later, massive, six-legged creatures with armored hides and multiple horns protruding from their elongated skulls. The lead animal, larger than the others, paused as it detected the scent of the injured Kellen. It lowered its head, preparing to charge in the direction of the fleeing cadets. Kayla drew her knife and, with deliberate precision, cut her palm. The blood welled immediately, and she allowed it to drip onto the rocks below. Human blood had a distinctive odor, metallic and unfamiliar to the predators of Zareth 9. The lead Thornic raised its head, nostrils flaring as it detected this new scent. With careful timing, Kayla moved from her position, making herself visible to the herd. The lead Thornic bellowed, a sound that reverberated across the plateau, and changed direction. The entire herd followed, charging toward the solitary human. Kayla waited until they committed to the charge before she moved, sprinting parallel to the ridge. The Thornics pursued, their massive bodies causing small avalanches of stone as they thundered after her. She led them away from Lizarin's group, deeper into the maze of rock formations where their size would become a disadvantage. For 20 minutes, she played a dangerous game of pursuit and evasion, using the terrain to separate the herd and confuse the lead animal. When she was certain that Lizarin's team had reached the safety of the caves, she began making her way back toward her original route. It was as she navigated around a particularly treacherous rock face that she encountered Varix's team. They had emerged from their canyon refuge only to find themselves in the path of several Thornics that had broken away from the main herd. Two of Varix's companions were injured, and their heavy weapons had proven ineffective against the thick hides of the creatures. "Win!" Varix growled when he saw her, his pride visibly wounded. "Have you come to witness our predicament?" "I've come to help," she replied simply. Varix made a dismissive gesture with one massive arm. "What can a human do that our weapons cannot?" His question was answered almost immediately. As a Thornic charged toward their position, Kayla stepped forward. She waited until the creature was committed to its attack, then moved with a speed that seemed impossible for an unenhanced human. Sidestepping the charge, she grabbed one of the creature's horns as it passed and used its own momentum to redirect its course. The Thornic, unable to compensate for the sudden change in direction, crashed into a boulder and momentarily stunned itself. "We need to move," Kayla said, turning to the shocked group. "There are more coming." For once, Varix did not argue. They began to retreat, with Kayla helping to support one of the injured cadets. They had covered perhaps half a kilometer when a roar unlike any they had heard before echoed through the canyon. A massive shape detached itself from the shadows ahead, a Carvon strider, drawn by the commotion and the scent of blood. The predator was enormous, at least 400 kilograms of muscle and bone, with 6 jointed limbs ending in hooked claws and a jaw that could crush stone. It moved with the fluid grace of an apex hunter, positioning itself between the cadets and their escape route. "We're trapped," one of Varix's team whispered. The Thornics behind, the strider ahead. Varix raised his weapon, though his arm trembled visibly. "We'll have to fight." "No," Kayla said, her voice still calm. "Your weapons will only anger it. Put the injured behind that rock formation. Varix, take your remaining weapon and be prepared to fire only if absolutely necessary." "What are you planning to do?" Varix demanded. Kayla was already moving forward, placing herself between the group and the advancing strider. "What's necessary?" The Carvon strider focused its 4 eyes on this new threat. It seemed almost puzzled by the small creature that stood alone against it. Kayla's posture changed subtly as she widened her stance and lowered her center of gravity. What happened next would later be analyzed by Academy instructors for years. The Strider lunged, its primary striking limbs extended to impale its prey. Kayla moved not away but toward the attack, slipping between the limbs and inside the creature's guard. Her hands found purchase on its armored thorax, and with a movement that defied conventional physics, she redirected the Strider's momentum upward. The 400-kilogram predator found itself suddenly airborne, its limbs flailing uselessly as Kayla lifted and then threw it against the canyon wall with enough force to crack its exoskeleton. The impact stunned the creature, but it quickly began to recover, hissing in rage and pain. Before it could regain its footing, Kayla had drawn her knife. With precision that spoke of endless practice, she struck at the junction between the creature's head and thorax, finding the narrow gap in its natural armor. The blade penetrated deep, severing critical neural pathways. The Strider convulsed once, then collapsed. Silence fell over the canyon. Varix and his team stared in disbelief at the human cadet who stood calmly wiping her blade clean on a piece of cloth. "How?" Varix began, but seemed unable to complete the thought. "We should move," Kayla said, already turning her attention to the injured cadets. "The Thornix will have heard the commotion." With the immediate threat eliminated, Kayla turned her attention to the wounded. One cadet had suffered a deep laceration from a Thornic horn, while another had a dislocated limb. With methodical efficiency, she treated both injuries using her limited medical supplies and improvised tools. "Why are you helping us?" Varix asked as she worked. "We have done nothing but mock you since training began." Kayla continued her work without looking up. "We're all cadets of the Academy. Completing the mission is what matters." The mission was to reach the extraction point individually, Varix pointed out. "No," Kayla replied, securing a bandage with practiced hands. "The mission was to survive and be extracted. Nowhere in the briefing did Sergeant Zoran specify that we couldn't cooperate." As she finished treating the injuries, Kayla outlined a plan. They would join forces with Lizarin's team, whom she had directed to the cave system. Together, they would make their way to the extraction point, using their combined skills to navigate the remaining challenges. "Your environmental suit is damaged," she noted, examining a tear in Varix's equipment. "The filtration system won't last more than 6 hours in its current state." Without hesitation, she removed a component from her own suit and integrated it into his. "This will extend your filter's functionality. The atmospheric toxins are less concentrated in this region, so I can manage with reduced filtration until we reach higher ground." Varix stared at her, mandibles working silently as he processed this unexpected assistance. "Finally," he said, "I do not understand you. Human." Kayla offered no explanation. Instead, she helped the injured cadets to their feet and began leading the way toward the cave system where Lizarin's team waited. The merged groups faced significant challenges in the hours that followed. A magnetic storm intensified, rendering navigation instruments completely useless. Kayla relied on celestial positioning and her memorized maps to maintain their course. When toxic gas pockets forced them to detour through a valley known to be a breeding ground for smaller but venomous predators, she constructed protective barriers using local vegetation whose chemical properties repelled the creatures. Throughout the journey, she remained at the front of the group, scouting ahead for dangers and returning to help the slower members. She shared her limited supplies without hesitation, eating last and least when rations were distributed. When the terrain became too difficult for the injured cadets, she helped carry them, displaying strength that continued to astonish her companions. "Your muscle density," Lizarin observed during a brief rest period. "It exceeds standard human parameters by approximately 63%. Kayla took a sip from her water purifier before responding. "Yes. You have undergone genetic enhancement," the Medusan continued. "Yet no such modifications appear in your Academy records." "I wasn't modified," Kayla replied. "I was born on Europa, gravitational adaptation." Understanding dawned in Lizarin's compound eyes. Europa, one of Jupiter's moons, had been among humanity's first extrasolar system colonies. Its higher gravity had led to natural selection favoring denser bone structure and increased muscle mass among multi-generation residents. You concealed this advantage, Varric said, his tone somewhere between accusation and respect. I didn't conceal anything, Kayla corrected him. It was in my file. No one asked. As the extraction deadline approached, the group faced their final challenge, a massive gorge that separated them from the extraction point. The bridge that had been marked on their maps had collapsed, likely due to seismic activity common on Zereth 9. We can't go around, Lizarin calculated. The detour would take 14 hours. We have less than 5 before the extraction window closes. Varric examined the gorge edge. Too unstable for climbing gear. We need another solution. Kayla had been studying the collapsed bridge, noting how several support cables remained attached to the far side. Without comment, she began uncoiling her synthetic cord and attaching it to her combat knife. What are you planning? Varric asked. I'm going to create a crossing, she replied. With practiced precision, she threw the knife with the attached cord. It sailed across the gap and embedded itself firmly in a tree-like growth on the far side. After testing the tension, she secured her end to a rock formation. This won't support our weight, Lizarin observed. Not alone. Kayla agreed. She spent the next 40 minutes searching the surrounding area, returning with several vines from the local flora. These she twisted together with sections of survival gear stripped from their damaged equipment, creating a rudimentary but functional rope bridge. One by one, the cadets crossed the gorge, with Kayla remaining until last to ensure everyone's safety. As she herself crossed, part of the improvised structure began to fail. Without panic, she increased her pace, making it to the far side moments before the entire bridge collapsed into the depths below. They reached the extraction point with 17 minutes to spare. The beacon activated as they approached, sending its signal through the turbulent atmosphere to the waiting transport vessels. As they gathered in the clearing, exhausted but alive, Varric approached Kayla. I was wrong about you, he said simply. Kayla nodded once in acknowledgement, then turned her attention to signaling the approaching extraction vessel. Upon their return to the academy, the cadets discovered that their entire ordeal had been monitored. Drones had captured footage of key moments during the survival test, including Kayla's encounter with the Carvon Strider. This footage was playing on screens throughout the facility when they arrived. Sergeant Zoran was waiting in the debriefing chamber. His expression was unreadable as the cadets assembled before him, still bearing the evidence of their struggles on Zereth 9. Cadet Wynn, he said, his forearms folded across his massive chest. Your assignment was to proceed alone to the extraction point. Yes, sir, Kayla acknowledged. You instead chose to aid 2 separate teams, endangering your own survival and delaying your extraction. Yes, sir. Zoran studied her for a long moment. Explain your reasoning. For the first time since arriving at the academy, Kayla spoke at length. The purpose of this institution is to train warriors to protect the Intergalactic Alliance. Warriors who will someday fight together against common threats. Learning to survive alone has value, but learning to ensure mutual survival has greater value. No single warrior, regardless of species or enhancement, can stand alone against the challenges our alliance faces. A murmur passed through the assembled cadets. Zoran raised a hand for silence. And your decision to engage a Carvon Strider in close combat, a creature that outweighed you by a factor of 6? Kayla's response was immediate and straightforward. It was blocking our escape route. Weapons had proven ineffective against its armor. A direct physical approach offered the highest probability of success with minimal risk to the injured cadets. Minimal risk to them, Zoran emphasized, maximum risk to yourself. I assessed the risk as acceptable based on my capabilities. Zoran activated a holographic display, showing the moment when Kayla had lifted and thrown the massive predator. These capabilities were not documented in your academy file. With respect, sir, they were. My place of birth is listed as Europa Station. The gravitational implications should have been obvious to anyone familiar with human colonial adaptations. The sergeant's expression shifted slightly, perhaps the closest thing to surprise his species could display. Indeed. He gestured to another figure who had been standing silently at the edge of the chamber. I believe you have a visitor. Cadet Wynne. The figure stepped forward, and a collective gasp rippled through the assembly. General Artan Wynne, Supreme Commander of the Alliance Defense Force and hero of the Proxima Centauri campaign, stood before them. His uniform bore the distinctive insignia of the 10th Fleet, and his weathered face carried the scars of countless battles. Hello, Kayla, he said, his voice softer than many would have expected from such a legendary warrior. Kayla straightened to perfect attention. General, I watched your performance on Zereth 9 with great interest. General Wynne continued. Your mother would be proud. This revelation sent another wave of whispers through the cadets. General Wynne was acknowledging a familial connection to the quiet human they had dismissed for months. For those unfamiliar with Alliance military history, Zoran announced, Cadet Wynne is the granddaughter of General Artan Wynne and the daughter of Commander Elisa Wynne, hero of the Arcturian defense. Varix's mandibles clicked in astonishment. You are the descendant of the Wynne lineage. Why did you not inform us? Kayla's gaze remained fixed on her grandfather. My name is in my file. Anyone could have made the connection if they had bothered to look. General Wynne smiled slightly. My granddaughter has always preferred to let her actions speak for her, a trait she inherited from her mother. He turned to address Sergeant Zoran. I believe this demonstration conclusively answers the Council's concerns about continued human participation in the Academy program. Zoran inclined his head. It does, General. The Council will receive my full report, including my recommendation that Cadet Wynne be advanced to specialized training immediately. In the days that followed, the Academy underwent a subtle but significant shift. Kayla, once overlooked and underestimated, found herself the subject of intense interest. Cadets who had previously ignored her now sought her guidance on combat techniques. Instructors who had dismissed her potential now studied her methods for possible integration into the training curriculum. Kayla herself remained largely unchanged. She continued her rigorous personal training regimen, though she now occasionally accepted partners for practice sessions. She shared her knowledge freely but never boasted of her accomplishments or abilities. One evening, as she was completing a training sequence in the combat simulator, Sergeant Zoran approached her. The Council has reviewed your performance, he said without preamble. They have approved your advancement to specialized training, with one condition. Kayla deactivated the simulator and turned to face him. Sir? They want you to serve as a strategic envoy first. Your unique approach to the challenges on Zereth 9 has attracted attention from several member worlds who are considering joining the Alliance. They believe you could be persuasive. I'm not a diplomat, sir. No, Zoran agreed. You're something potentially more valuable. You're living proof that technology and genetic enhancement aren't the only paths to excellence. Some of the more traditional worlds find that compelling. Kayla considered this for a moment. When would I begin? Immediately. A transport is being prepared for your departure to the Regelian Conference. As Kayla packed her few possessions, Varix appeared at her dormitory entrance. The massive cadet seemed uncomfortable, his normally confident posture slightly hunched. You are leaving, he stated. Yes, Kayla confirmed. The others wished me to convey their... He searched for the appropriate word. Appreciation for what you taught us on Zereth 9. Kayla nodded once in acknowledgement. I also wish to say, Varix began, but Kayla interrupted him. You don't need to say anything. We're all cadets of the Academy. What happened on Zereth 9 is what should have happened. Varix was silent for a moment. You will return? Eventually. The transport that carried Kayla from the Academy was small by military standards, but impressive nonetheless. As it rose through Trinivir's atmosphere, she stood at the viewport, watching the gleaming spire of the Academy recede into the distance. General Wynne joined her there, his weathered hands clasped behind his back. You could have told them who you were from the beginning, he observed. It would have made your time at the Academy easier. That wouldn't have proven anything, Kayla replied. No, he agreed. I suppose it wouldn't have. After a moment, he added, "Your assignment as strategic envoy won't be easy. Many of these worlds are skeptical of the alliance. They fear losing their identity, their traditions." "I understand. I believe you do," the general said thoughtfully. "Perhaps better than most." He turned to face her fully. "You know, in all my years of service, I've found that the quietest voices often carry the most weight when they finally choose to speak." Kayla's lips curved in the smallest of smiles. "I'll keep that in mind." As the transport accelerated toward its first destination, Kayla Wynne stood silently at the viewport, her reflection barely visible against the backdrop of stars. Behind her, the crew moved with the efficient precision of military personnel, their conversations hushed in her presence. They had all seen the footage from Zereth 9. They had all heard the stories that were already spreading throughout the Alliance. Stories of the human cadet who had thrown a 400-kilogram beast and led 2 teams to safety through one of the most hostile environments in known space. Stories of quiet strength and uncompromising discipline. Stories that would soon reach the worlds she was being sent to influence. Kayla knew that her silence had become her greatest weapon, a void that others filled with their own expectations and assumptions. She had learned long ago on Europa that words were often unnecessary when actions could speak with such eloquence. As the stars streaked past the viewport, Kayla allowed herself a moment of reflection. The path ahead would present new challenges, different from those she had faced at the academy, but no less demanding. She would meet them as she always had, with discipline, with determination, and with the quiet confidence that had become her hallmark. The legacy of the Wynne family would continue, not through boastful declarations or displays of technological superiority, but through the silent strength of a human woman who had proven that sometimes the most powerful statement was the one left unspoken.